Hey guys, tonight we ease gently into the soft canvas edges of an 1860s Union camp, a place where the wind moves through cotton drill cloth and where morning begins long before the sun decides to stretch. You arrive here as a new recruit of sorts, though your journey is purely imaginative and pleasantly low risk, which is fortunate because most of us today would probably struggle with something as innocent as starting a fire with damp wood. That is said with warm affection, of course. No judgment if your idea of rugged survival is remembering where you put your phone charger. Before you get too comfortable in your blanket or whatever cozy setup you have going right now, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these stories. There is never any pressure. I want this space to feel like settling into a camp chair by a friendly fire, rather than filling out a compulsory form delivered by a stern quartermaster. It might be just past midnight in New York, or an early evening somewhere far away. You might be curled in bed with a small lamp glowing, or lying back with headphones as a distant fan hums. Wherever you are, let the edges of the day loosen a little. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us begin our slow step into the past. You arrive at the outskirts of the camp just as Reveille begins to ripple out. It is not the jarring burst you might imagine from movies. Instead, it is more like a distant call that mingles with early fog and the faint smell of ash. You lie still for a moment, half wondering if you dreamt the sound. Then your eyes open, and you find yourself inside a canvas wedge tent that feels both chilly and stuffy depending on where you place your hand. This is completely normal. Canvas tents in the 1860s are not known for climate control. Soldiers joke about how they always seem to collect heat in the wrong places and release it everywhere else. You rise slowly. The ground beneath you is firm yet slightly uneven, since the soldiers who arrived before you hurried to set up camp on land that was never meant to be luxurious. A soft layer of straw helps a little, but only a little. You brush off your blanket, noticing how tiny bits of grass cling to its wool fibers. The wool itches at first. Then, oddly, it becomes comforting in its heaviness. Some soldiers say the scratchiness reminds them they are still alive and still in the rhythms of camp, though historians still argue about how common it really was for blankets to be so coarse that they left small patterns on your skin. Outside, you hear murmurs. A few men are already stirring, their voices muffled as if wrapped in fog. Someone yawns in a long theatrical way that causes another to respond with a good-natured complaint about the noise. A tin cup clinks against something, probably a kettle or a rock or the soul of a half-awake soldier. You push aside the tent flap and step out. Cool morning air greets you, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke from last night's fires. The company street stretches ahead like a tidy aisle of canvas peaks. Each tent stands in a row, shaped like a child's drawing of a simple roof. Some have small piles of equipment outside. A few display booths placed neatly together. Others look like the occupants simply collapsed inside without bothering to arrange anything. To your right, the pale horizon lightens by slow degrees. Someone nearby mutters about the weather. Another soldier walks past with his coat half buttoned, his eyes not quite awake. He acknowledges you with a slow nod, as if nodding requires the same effort as lifting a knapsack. Morning in camp is never dramatic. Instead, it is a gentle layering of small actions. Boots thump, tinware rattles. The fog lifts in thin sheets. You take a few steps along the company street. You notice the flagpole at the camp center, tall and bare at this hour. A faint breeze stirs it. The camp feels larger now that you can see it properly. Rows of tents radiate from the center, creating something that feels replicable and orderly, despite being made from little more than canvas, rope, and wooden stakes. A drummer boy practices a simple rhythm somewhere toward the far fires. The taps are soft, as if he tries to avoid irritating anyone who is still half asleep. He misses a beat, grumbles, then begins again. You smile. The sound is imperfect, human, and strangely soothing. You move past a group already starting their morning fire. Sparks briefly glow in the low light, then settle. One soldier leans over, coaxing the flame with gentle breaths. Fire building in camp is an art. Everyone has opinions about how much kindling to use or how to angle the sticks. Some swear by pine needles, some say pine needles burn too quickly. Historians still argue about which technique was the most common, though every veteran you have met seems convinced his method was the superior one. Someone calls out quietly, asking if anyone has seen the company cook. No one answers. It is too early for that level of commitment. Instead, a kettle of water slowly warms over an uncertain flame. Coffee is the lifeblood of camp mornings in this period. It tastes slightly smoky, slightly muddy, and occasionally slightly metallic if the tin pot is dented. Yet soldiers treasure it. Even the process of waiting for it to heat feels like a small ceremony. You continue your walk. Your boots scuff the earth. You feel the slight weight of fatigue in your shoulders, the kind born from sleeping on the ground rather than from any strenuous activity. You hear someone laugh softly at a private joke, the kind that dissolves quickly like breath on a cold window. These small sounds create a rhythm more dependable than any drum beat. As you make your way toward the edge of camp, you notice the remnants of last night's campfire stories. A couple of logs still sit arranged as seats. Someone left a single spoon near the ashes, glinting faintly. A fiddle case rests beside one of the logs, closed but waiting. The memory of last night's tune hangs in the quiet air. You almost imagine you hear the last drifting notes. This is the beginning of your day in the 1860s. Nothing rushed, nothing loud, just soft steps, cool air, and the first stretch of canvas light. You breathe in slowly, noticing the scent of pine and earth. The camp is waking, and you are part of its rhythm now. You shuffle through a simple breakfast, learn how soldiers soften hardtack, and join in the first low-energy tasks of the day. You step back along the company street as the camp fully wakes, and the smell of coffee begins to drift through the cool air. It is not the rich cafe aroma you might hope for. Instead, it is a smoky, slightly burnt scent that mingles with damp earth and last night's ashes. Somehow, it is still strangely comforting. Maybe it is the warmth. Maybe it is the routine. Maybe it is simply that everyone else around you seems to accept it with quiet appreciation, as though the first sip makes the morning feel official. You join a small cluster of soldiers gathered around a kettle, suspended from a crude wooden tripod. The fire beneath it flickers and pops, occasionally sending up a spark that drifts like a lazy firefly. One soldier stirs the dark brew with a long iron spoon, while another tries to guess whether this will be one of the better batches. Such optimism is admirable, because Union camp coffee in the 1860s is famously unpredictable. Some regiments grind beans freshly with improvised tools like rifle butts or smooth stones. Others rely on beans that have traveled hundreds of miles, shaken around in wagons until they resemble gravel. Historians still argue about how often soldiers actually had decent coffee, though nearly everyone agrees they drank it whenever they could. You accept a tin cup from a nearby crate. The cup is slightly dented on one side, and the handle wiggles just a little, but that is normal for camp tinware. You tilt it under the kettle spout as the soldier ladles the dark liquid. The metal warms instantly against your fingers, though not enough to burn. You take a slow sip. It is strong, very strong, strong enough to make you blink once or twice before settling into its flavor, but it is also warm, and in this early hour warmth is sometimes enough. Breakfast is simple and requires no ceremony. Someone hands you a square of hardtack, that famously unforgiving biscuit of flour, water, and long shelf life. You tap it lightly against your cup, and it makes a small knock, almost musical in an odd way. Soldiers often joke that hardtack has two states of existence, hard and harder. Some men soften it by dipping it in coffee. Others crumble it into the kettle to thicken the brew into something resembling porridge. A few insist that tapping it with the butt of a knife helps. You try dipping yours into the coffee. The edges soften gradually until it becomes edible, or at least polite enough not to chip a tooth. Around you, soldiers lean against logs, crates, and whatever else they can find. Some speak quietly, sharing unfinished dreams or plans for the day. Others remain silent, letting the stillness stretch between sips. A few write brief notes in pocket diaries, recording the weather or a memory from home. Many such diaries survive today, small and fragile, filled with handwriting that shifts with mood and circumstance. It is one of the most common artifacts from the war, though historians still debate how representative these diaries are, since writing habits varied widely. You finish your hardtack and rinse your tin cup with a trickle of water from your canteen. The morning sun rises just enough to throw soft light across the tents. You hear the faint scrape of shovels nearby, where men begin clearing the company street of last night's debris. Someone drags a bucket of water toward the kitchens. Someone else shakes crumbs from a blanket. A few men stretch their shoulders, preparing for the routine drills that inevitably fill the day. These early chores are never glamorous. They exist between the major duties and the small pleasures, holding everything together in a rhythm that feels almost domestic. You help gather kindling from the edge of camp, bending to collect twigs still damp with dew. As you straighten, you notice how the sunlight catches the thin veil of mist above the ground. It reminds you of last night's faint fiddle notes, still echoing in your memory. A corporal walks past, carrying a stack of small wooden ration crates. He sets them down with a grunt and mutters a comment about hoping for fresh salt pork later. No one responds at first because no one wants to tempt disappointment. Food supply in the 1860s is famously inconsistent. Sometimes you receive more than enough. Sometimes you make do with whatever arrives. Sometimes nothing arrives until well past noon, which explains why soldiers often tucked away bits of food whenever they could. There are accounts of men keeping secret stashes of dried apples or extra coffee beans in small pouches. Whether this was typical or rare remains a point of debate among historians, though the idea aligns with the common instinct to save a little something for uncertain days. You help carry the kindling back toward the central fire pit where breakfast cleanup continues. Someone scrapes a skillet with a wooden paddle. Someone else hums a short tune under their breath. A soldier from another company wanders over holding a piece of hardtack shaped like a heart. He claims it is a sign of good fortune. No one believes him, but everyone laughs anyway. The fire crackles. The last cups of coffee are poured. You feel more awake now, settled into the slow morning pulse of camp life. The chores are simple, repetitive, and strangely grounding. You begin to understand why veterans speak fondly of these quiet routines. They create a sense of belonging, even in a world built from canvas and uncertainty. You return your tin cup to your haversack, tying the string gently so it does not rattle too loudly as you walk. You brush dirt from your trouser legs and notice the faint imprint your blanket left on your sleeve earlier. You stretch your neck, feeling the stiffness born from sleeping on uneven earth. Around you, the camp shifts like a living creature waking fully. Men move with more purpose. Fires brighten. Voices rise in cheerful greetings. A sergeant calls out instructions for the first drill of the day. A dog wanders between tents, looking for scraps and companionship. Someone finds an old shoe and jokes that it must have marched off on its own during the night. You look around and feel the day beginning to build, quiet but steady. This breakfast hour reminds you that camp life is shaped less by dramatic events and more by the patient repetition of small tasks, each one tying you gently to the next. Soon, you will move on to tidying your uniform and preparing your tent space for inspection. But for now, with the last warmth of the fire fading from your hands, you are simply part of this soft morning. You adjust your wool uniform, tidy your canvas shelter, and notice how each soldier arranges their limited personal space. You linger a moment near the fading breakfast fire until the sergeant's voice carries across the company street with a gentle firmness that signals it is time to tidy up. The slow shuffle of men rising from crates and logs confirms that this next part of the morning is as routine as coffee. You take a light breath, preparing yourself for the quiet ritual of straightening your uniform and bringing a little order to your small patch of canvas life. You begin by brushing crumbs and soot from your jacket. The wool is thick, almost stubborn, absorbing the early morning damp like a sponge with opinions. You smooth the sleeves, tug the cuffs, and feel the weight of the fabric settle against your shoulders. The blue of the Union coat is muted in this early light, softened by dust and repeated wear. Some soldiers joke that the uniform seems to shrink in cold weather and stretch in warm weather, a phenomenon that likely says more about mood than textile science, though historians still debate how consistent wool shrinkage really was in the field. You check the buttons next. They glint faintly, each one embossed with the familiar eagle that marks your service. You run your thumb along them, making sure none have loosened too dramatically. Buttons fall off with surprising frequency in this decade. The combination of rough wool, constant movement, and occasional encounters with brambles makes it almost inevitable. Archaeologists later find these buttons scattered across old campgrounds like muted breadcrumbs left by generations of soldiers. You half smile at the thought that your own uniform might contribute to that quiet archaeological record someday. Your forage cap sits on a small crate outside your tent. You pick it up and dust off the crown, noticing a faint crease where you folded it just a bit too hastily last night. The small leather visor creaks softly as you adjust it. The sound is warm, familiar, like the subtle stretch of a well-worn book spine. You place the cap on your head, adjusting it until it sits level. It makes you feel just a bit more awake. Now comes the tent itself, your personal canvas haven that feels both cramped and comforting. You step inside, ducking slightly because the ridgepole is lower than it appears from the outside. Morning light leaks through the canvas walls in soft amber patches. You crouch to begin the task of straightening your bedding. The blanket is still rumpled from sleep, carrying the vague pattern of your shifting during the night. You give it a few firm shakes, sending tiny flecks of straw drifting lazily through the air. They settle on the ground like drifting snowflakes. Your knapsack sits propped near the tent entrance, leaning at an angle that suggests it nearly toppled during the night. You straighten it and secure a strap that slipped loose. Inside the pack lie the simple contents of your portable world. An extra shirt, a pair of socks, a small sewing kit, and a few keepsakes that ride along with you no matter where the regiment goes. You check the stitching on the knapsack flap. It is holding well today. The thread is a little uneven, the result of mending done by a tired hand many days ago, but it still does its job. You crouch again to smooth the ground cloth beneath your blanket. A few pebbles poke through, so you brush them aside. The canvas floor is never completely comfortable, but removing the small irritations makes a big difference. You tuck the edges neatly against the tent corners, mimicking the tidy setups you have seen from veteran soldiers who treat their space like a small, mobile home. Outside, you hear a soldier complain about losing his toothbrush, which, in this era, usually means a stick with a frayed end, or perhaps a small bought brush, if he was fortunate. Another soldier responds that his brush went missing 2 days ago and he suspects the company dog. Whether this is true or simply camp humor, you cannot tell, but it earns a round of sleepy chuckles. You step out of your tent to continue with chores. Around you, men straighten their own spaces, creating a synchronized rustling sound of canvas, blankets, and soft grunts. One soldier nearby has hung his socks on a rope that runs between 2 tent stakes. They sway gently in the morning breeze, looking more like flags of domestic victory than items of laundry. Another soldier arranges his bedroll with such meticulous care that you wonder if he practiced this at home long before joining the army. He folds each corner with mathematical precision, then sits back to admire his work with the quiet pride of someone who has won a personal contest no one else knew was happening. You notice how each tent reveals the personality of its occupant. Some spaces are nearly empty except for essentials, showing the habits of men who prefer minimalism long before the term existed. Others have small treasures tucked into corners, a deck of playing cards softened with use, a tiny sketchbook filled with uneven drawings, a lucky coin tied onto a string, or a small wooden whistle. Soldiers often keep small charms or tokens from home, though the exact nature of such keepsakes varies so much that historians still argue about which items were common and which were rare. The corporal calls out a brief reminder to prepare for inspection later. His tone suggests this is not an urgent matter, but it is still best to be ready. Cleanliness standards in camp shift depending on the circumstances, but most officers prefer some measure of order. You give your coat a final tug and check once more that your cap sits neatly. You return to your tent for one more sweep. You roll up your blanket with deliberate, unhurried movements and tie it with a short length of rope. The knot holds well. You place the roll against the far side of the tent so it stays clean and ready for travel. You reach for your haversack next. It hangs on a wooden peg you carved from a branch 2 days ago. The peg already shows signs of wear, but still supports the weight. You brush off a bit of dust from the haversack flap and tighten the strap. As you work, a gust of wind lifts the tent flap, letting in a bright streak of sunlight. The inside warms instantly, and for a moment, you are transported forward to the imagined warmth of a noontime sun. Then the flap settles again, and the cool morning returns. You emerge from the tent and take a long breath. The company street appears straighter now that everyone has arranged their spaces. The lines of canvas seem more uniform. The subtle order is satisfying, as though the camp has collectively taken a deep breath and smoothed its coat. You pat your jacket once more, ensuring the last crease is gone. You check the placement of your cup at your side, making sure it will not clang loudly as you move. You feel the slight scratch of wool at your neck, gentle and grounding. The tent behind you is now a small sanctuary made tidy by your hands. The day stretches ahead with drills, chores, and quiet conversations yet to come. But for now, you have created order from the soft morning chaos, and that brings a sense of calm that settles into your shoulders like warm sunlight. You walk to the river to wash wool socks, overhear gentle campfire chatter, and settle into the steady hum of the encampment. You step away from your neatly straightened tent just as a small group of soldiers begins drifting toward the line of trees at the far end of camp, each carrying a pair of wool socks draped over a shoulder or stuffed into a pocket. You recognize the unmistakable look of reluctant obligation that comes with laundry day, even if day is a flexible term in the 1860s, and laundry usually means whatever can be managed with river water, cold hands, and stubborn determination. You fall into step behind them, moving at the slow, unhurried pace that feels natural in the early morning, after chores are done but drills have not yet begun. The air carries a faint sweetness as you walk, a mix of pine, damp earth, and distant wood smoke. Somewhere behind you, a corporal calls out for someone to fetch another bucket of water. Someone else shouts back that they already did, and the two voices fade into the soft hum of a camp gradually finding its rhythm. Your boots crunch lightly on the path, and the sun finally rises enough to scatter pale gold through the branches above. When you reach the riverbank, the water glints with a cool shimmer. It is not a grand river, more like a wide creek, moving with quiet insistence over smooth stones. Soldiers kneel along the edge, dipping socks into the current with resigned sighs. Washing wool in cold water is always a test of patience, because the fabric seems to swallow and hold every drop, turning surprisingly heavy. One private mutters that his socks weigh more now than when he marched in them yesterday. His companion replies that this is simply the wool showing its true personality. You find a spot on the bank and kneel. Your knees sink into soft soil, and your fingers feel the shock of cold as you plunge the first sock into the water. The fabric stiffens slightly before loosening. You rub it gently between your palms, working at small patches of dirt with the steady rhythm of someone who knows the chore is inevitable but not unpleasant. You squeeze out the water, watch it fall in quick silver droplets back into the river, then repeat the process on the second sock. Nearby, two soldiers argue good-naturedly about whether river washing or snow washing is worse. One insists that snow leaves the wool brighter. The other counters that snow washing is nothing but soaking your hands in misery. It is clear that both perspectives come from experience, and historians still argue about how often soldiers wash their garments at all. Some accounts suggest weekly routines. Others imply that laundry occurred whenever the smell became unbearable. The truth likely shifted from regiment to regiment, from season to season, and from mood to mood. You wring the socks again, feeling the cool water trickle along your fingers. The river hums beside you, soft and steady. A few fallen leaves drift along the surface, spinning in slow circles before floating past. The morning sun warms your back, creating a peaceful balance between warm air and cold water. It is the kind of small sensory contrast that makes camp life strangely grounding. As you lay the freshly washed socks over a sunlit rock, a cluster of soldiers settles nearby to exchange gossip, the camp's most reliable source of entertainment. One soldier mentions hearing that a famous band from a nearby regiment might pass through in a few days. Another insists he saw tracks suggesting a supply wagon arrived late last night. A third adds that someone in Company B allegedly caught a glimpse of a wild hog, though no one is convinced. The stories blend together with the ease of men who know that gossip gives shape to long days, even if none of it proves true. You sit back and let their voices drift over you. One man shares a tale about a sergeant who once tried to roast hardtack over a fire like marshmallows, which resulted in nothing more than a warm square of stubborn dough. Another recounts how a corporal swears he sleeps better when he places his shoes at the exact same angle beside his blanket each night. Whether these details are real or invented is hard to tell, but their retelling gives everyone something to smile at. A soldier with a fiddle case ambles down to the river, not to wash anything but simply to enjoy the company. He plucks a few strings lightly, testing their tension. The notes float out in thin, wandering phrases, not quite forming a tune but hinting at one. The sound lingers above the water like a dragonfly. You recognize a few intervals from a melody he played last night. It is incomplete, yet somehow perfect for the moment. Someone jokes that if he plays too softly, the fish will fall asleep. Another advises him to try serenading the socks, perhaps convincing them to dry faster. The fiddler responds with a quiet laugh and keeps plucking, letting each note settle gently into the morning air. You shift your weight and dip your hands into the river once more to rinse away the lingering grit. The water numbs your fingers again, but you do not mind. It wakes you in a calm, steady way that feels different from the jolt of camp coffee earlier. You splash a little water onto your face, letting it cool your skin. The droplets run down your neck, refreshing as you breathe in the crisp scent of river moss. Behind you, someone continues telling a story about a soldier who claims he once boiled his socks to kill the smell, only to shrink them so dramatically that they fit a child afterward. Historians still debate whether soldiers actually boiled wool socks in the field, or whether this is one of those tales that grows with each retelling. Either way, it earns another round of laughter. You check your socks again. They still glisten, but have begun to lose their heavy dripping. You drape them carefully over your shoulder, letting the sun begin its slow work. A soldier next to you does the same, then pats his socks fondly, as though proud of a job well done. Laundry may not be thrilling, but it is one of the few chores that produces immediately visible results, and that counts for something in camp life. As you rise from the riverbank, you take one last look at the flowing water. It sparkles like a trail of small lanterns, each ripple catching the light just so. The breeze lifts the edges of your damp sleeves. The distant murmur of camp life continues its soft rhythm. You feel settled, grounded, and more a part of this world than when you first stepped out of your tent earlier. With clean socks drying on your shoulder and the warmth of the sun gathering along the path, you turn back toward camp. The day waits with its drills and tasks, but you carry with you the calm of the river, the gentle notes of the fiddle, and the easy laughter of men sharing small stories. You pack your haversack and knapsack, checking straps and balancing weight while supply wagons creak at the camp edge. You return from the river with your damp socks over your shoulder, and as you cross the company street, you notice the subtle shift that always signals a coming march. It is not dramatic. No bugle call cuts the air. No officer strides through the rows shouting urgent orders. Instead, it is a quiet restlessness. A series of faint clues. Men tightening straps on their knapsacks. The distant groan of wagon wheels testing their axles. The low rumble of mules huffing as teamsters check harnesses. You recognize the feel of a camp preparing to move. Not immediately, but inevitably. Your own tent stands where you left it. Still neat and orderly, but the sense of stillness around it has changed. A private nearby begins rolling his blanket with brisk precision. Another brushes dust from his canteen. Someone swears softly under his breath as he tries to find the spoon he misplaced during breakfast. These small motions build like ripples across the rows of canvas, each one nudging you toward your own preparations. You step inside your tent to gather your gear. The morning light filters through the canvas walls, making everything glow as though washed in warm milk. You retrieve your socks first, draping them on a rope near the doorway so they can dry faster while you pack. Their wetness leaves a faint, cool patch on your sleeve. You tug your knapsack toward you. The familiar scuffed leather and canvas smell mingles with the earthy scent of the tent floor. Packing for a march is an art form that soldiers learn quickly. There is a balance to achieve, both literal and emotional. Too much weight means sore shoulders and a long day. Too little planning means you discover halfway down the road that you forgot something essential, like coffee or that one spare shirt that suddenly matters more than anything else. You begin by spreading your items on the ground cloth. Your blanket, your extra shirt, your tin cup, your knife, your small sewing kit, and the handful of keepsakes that make the world feel familiar no matter where the regiment wanders. You fold the shirt carefully, pressing the fabric into a tidy square. You place it at the bottom of the knapsack to create a soft cushion. Your blanket comes next, rolled with practiced hands. The rope you tied earlier holds firm, though one knot needs a slight tug. You tuck the blanket in, shaping it so the knapsack sits evenly on your back later. You place the sewing kit beside it, small enough to disappear among the folds. Tiny needles and thread seem like insignificant tools, yet they become the difference between a uniform that holds together and one that falls apart mid-march. Outside, wagon wheels creak again. You hear the wooden spokes complain under their burden. Supply wagons in the 1860s are temperamental companions. They carry everything from spare ammunition to salted pork, but they also groan with every rut in the road. A teamster shouts a command to his mules. One mule responds with a long, dramatic bray that echoes through the trees and makes several soldiers laugh. Historians still argue about how often mules cause delays during marches, though soldiers swear the animals chose their stubborn moments with uncanny precision. You continue packing. Your tin cup hangs from the side strap of your haversack. You make sure it is tied securely, because nothing is more irritating on a long walk than listening to your own gear clang with every step. You add a small pouch of coffee beans, a treasure you refuse to lose. You slip in a handful of hardtack as well. Even when you do not look forward to eating it, you know better than to march without it. You pause, glancing at the small wooden charm tucked near the edge of your blanket. It is a simple carving of a 4-petaled flower. You do not know who made it or when it first found its way into your gear, but it has traveled with you for weeks now. You slide it into your haversack with quiet care. Even if no one else knows it is there, it feels wrong to leave it behind. Soldiers often carry such tokens, though historians debate how typical these personal charms were. Some accounts describe men carrying locks of hair or folded prayers. Others describe pockets full of trinkets. The truth is likely somewhere in between, shaped by individual habit more than widespread custom. You lift your knapsack to test the weight. It feels balanced, though heavy. The kind of heavy that promises sore shoulders later, but not misery. You adjust the straps to make sure they sit comfortably. Then you slide the haversack over your shoulder and let it rest against your side. It bumps gently against your hip, reassuringly solid. Outside, the camp grows busier. A lieutenant walks past with a clipboard tucked under his arm, inspecting the readiness of each company. A drummer boy practices a steady march beat, soft and halting, as if warming up for the miles ahead. A couple of soldiers discuss the likely length of the day's movement. One guesses 10 miles. The other argues that the road conditions will slow everything to a crawl. They both know neither guess will prove accurate. Marches rarely follow expectations in this era. You step from your tent to take in the slow choreography unfolding across the camp. Men roll canvas tents with practiced motions, folding them into long bundles that 2 or 3 soldiers can carry. Fires are smothered, leaving faint trails of smoke twisting into the air. The company dog trots between tents, as if inspecting everyone's progress, tail held high, offering encouragement or impatience depending on how you interpret its wagging. Someone calls out, asking if anyone has spare soap. Another soldier responds that he traded his last bar yesterday for a piece of dried apple. A few men begin wrapping their bayonets and muskets in cloth to keep dust from collecting in the mechanisms during the march. The subtle clacking of metal parts blends with footsteps and low voices. You take a moment to adjust your cap and brush a bit of river silt from your sleeve. Your socks, now mostly dry, are retrieved from the rope and tucked gently into your pack. A private next to you ties his shoes with exaggerated vigor, muttering that he will lose them halfway down the road if he does not. Another soldier checks his canteen by giving it a small shake. The metallic slosh inside reminds you to refill yours later. A pair of mules trudges past, their harness bells making soft jingling sounds. The supply wagon they pull sways gently, loaded with crates marked with faded black letters. The teamster gives you a friendly nod. You nod back, aware that these wagons carry more than just supplies. They carry the rhythm of the entire regiment, providing food, tools, and the occasional surprise like a bundle of letters from home. You tighten the final strap of your knapsack and take a steadying breath. The smell of earth and canvas surrounds you. The camp's familiar landmarks seem heavier with the knowledge that you will leave them behind soon, though another camp will rise somewhere down the road before the day ends. The march ahead promises dust, mud, and the steady beat of boots on ground, but for now, everything moves softly, gently, like a long breath taken before stepping forward. Preparations complete, you feel ready. The slow march to winter quarters begins not with a grand announcement, but with this quiet, patient gathering of gear, steps, and steady breaths. You join the column as it moves through mud and soft ruts, feeling the mixture of tedium and anticipation that comes with marching. You fall into the slow, forming line of soldiers as the company gathers near the camp edge. No one rushes. Marches in the 1860s rarely begin with dramatic energy. Instead, the men move in loose waves, each adjusting straps, settling gear, and giving the occasional resigned sigh about the state of the road ahead. You hear one private mutter that the path was muddy yesterday, which means today it will be worse. Another replies that the road dries fast if the breeze stays with you. Historians still argue about how reliable these soldiers' weather predictions were, though their confidence in their own instincts never wavers. The line stretches gently forward, boots scuffing in soft dust that becomes thicker just beyond the tree line. A drummer boy taps a slow cadence to help everyone find the same rhythm. It is not the crisp, parade ground beat Hollywood might imagine, but something gentler, almost lopsided in places, as the boy warms his hands against the morning chill. The cadence settles into your bones like a heartbeat. Ahead, the supply wagons creak into motion, their wheels sinking a few inches into the damp road. The mules pull with patient persistence, ears flicking at flies, tails swishing with mild annoyance. A teamster calls out what could either be encouragement or a complaint, and one mule appears to consider ignoring him before deciding that forward progress is acceptable. You adjust your knapsack on your shoulders. The weight redistributes itself in a perfectly inconvenient way, but you settle into it, accepting that every march begins with slight discomfort before your body adjusts. The first steps always feel heavy, but soon the rhythm takes over. You fall in beside a soldier you spoke with near the river earlier. He gives you a brief nod, the kind that creates camaraderie without needing words. The road curves gently into a corridor of tall trees, whose branches filter the sunlight into shifting golden patches. Mud glistens in these patches, reflecting the sky in small puddles that will inevitably claim at least one ill-placed boot. You try to avoid the worst spots, but soon discover that the entire road is a patchwork of soft ground and shallow ruts carved by countless wagons. The soles of your boots sink slightly with each step, making a soft sucking sound that repeats with hypnotic rhythm. A soldier behind you comments that mud seems to grow heavier with each mile, as if it clings to boots out of spite. Someone else replies that mud is simply doing its duty by trying to keep everyone in one place. The line laughs quietly. Marching humor is subtle, born from shared discomfort and the strange joy of finding something to smile about in an otherwise tedious situation. You watch as the colors of the forest shift. Leaves glimmer with morning dew, ferns bow under patches of sunlight. A hawk circles overhead, calling out once before disappearing behind the trees. The subtle beauty of the landscape almost distracts you from the strain of the march, though not quite enough to make you forget the growing ache in your shoulders. The column continues at a steady pace. Officers ride along the flanks, checking spacing and offering quiet instructions. One lieutenant adjusts his horse's reins and mentions that winter quarters might be only a few days' march away. His tone is hopeful, though the men around you share a look that suggests they will believe it when they see it. Soldiers learn quickly that distances on paper rarely match the realities of muddy roads and stubborn wagons. You take a sip from your canteen. The water is cool, with a faint metallic taste picked up from its tin lining. It refreshes your throat. You shake the canteen slightly, estimating how much remains. Enough for now. You make a note to refill it at the next stream or, well, you pass. Water sources become tiny landmarks on long marches, each one a brief reprieve. The road narrows just ahead, forcing the column to compress. Boots squelch deeper into the mud. A soldier at the front calls out a warning about a particularly slick spot, but by the time the message reaches you, the mud has already claimed one of your steps. Your foot sinks unexpectedly, sending a light splash onto your trousers. You sigh, then laugh softly. Everyone near you lifts their boots in the same sticky struggle, as though the earth itself has decided to playfully tug at each soldier one by one. A wagon behind you hits a rut, jolting suddenly. One of the crates inside shifts and emits a dull thud. The teamster apologizes to no one in particular and adjusts the reins. The mules continue onward with infinite patience. You think for a moment about how historians still debate whether mules or horses served better in army logistics. Soldiers tend to side with mules, mostly because mules appear to share the same stubborn survival instinct as the men who march beside them. As the column continues, the sun rises fully, warming your back and drying the edges of your sleeves. The mud on the road begins to crack in places, making a patchwork of wet and dry terrain that challenges even the most careful step. You look ahead and see soldiers beginning to loosen their collars, adjusting their caps to shield their eyes. A faint breeze carries the scent of pine resin, mingled with the earthy smell of churned soil. You hear birdsong threading through the stillness, punctuated occasionally by the distant waffle of a wagon axle. These natural sounds blend into a lullaby of movement. Long marches can feel meditative once your body accepts the rhythm. You stop thinking about every step and simply move, carried forward by the line of men around you. A private to your left hums a tune under his breath, something he says he learned from his grandmother. It repeats softly, drifting between notes until it becomes part of the road's soundscape. Someone ahead whistles a counter melody. It does not harmonize perfectly, but no one seems to mind. These small improvised tunes help ease the miles, turning the march into something more pleasant than you expected. The forest eventually thins, revealing a stretch of open land where the road widens and the mud becomes less treacherous. You feel your shoulders relax slightly, the ground firms under your boots. The pace quickens just a touch, though not enough to be strenuous. A few men cheer quietly at the change in footing, their relief palpable even in whispered tones. You glance behind you and watch the column trail back into the trees. It looks endless, a blue and brown ribbon weaving through the landscape. The sight fills you with a sense of belonging. You are one thread in the larger fabric of this moving world, carried forward by collective purpose rather than urgency. As the afternoon deepens toward dusk, the light softens. Shadows stretch across the road. The temperature cools just enough to ease the heat of your march. The sky transitions to muted lavender and rose, painting the clouds with delicate streaks that seem almost too peaceful for a marching column. Someone remarks that dusk is the best marching hour because the world grows quiet and the road seems shorter. The wagons creak more slowly now. The officers consult each other, pointing toward a small grove ahead where they intend to pause and possibly make a temporary camp. You feel a subtle shift ripple through the men as the idea of rest hovers in the air. Even the mules seem to perk up. You take a deep breath, letting the dusk settle around you like a soft blanket. The march has been long, steady, and grounded in simple motions. You are tired, but not exhausted. The rhythm of boots on earth has settled you, gently but thoroughly, into the mindset of a traveling soldier. As the column slows and the glow of evening deepens, you prepare to step into the next phase of the journey, carrying with you the dusty, muddy, strangely soothing memory of the road behind. You help set up the new site, raising tents, placing fire pits, and watching officers select positions for the company streets. You step off the road with the rest of the column as the officers finally signal a halt. The grove ahead is not large, but it offers a gentle slope, a cluster of trees for shelter, and a decent spread of dry ground. For a regiment that has trudged through mud for hours, this small patch of calmer earth feels as welcoming as a furnished parlor. You roll your shoulders slowly, letting the weight of your knapsack settle before loosening its straps. A soft murmur travels through the line as men realize they will be here for more than a brief stop. This place, at least for a little while, will become home. The wagon teams pull off to one side and begin unfastening the ties that secure the canvas bundles. The mules thump their hooves with visible relief, ears pointing forward as if curious about the evening's plans. One teamster pats his mule's neck and promises an extra handful of oats if it behaves through setup. Whether the mule understands or simply appreciates the attention is unclear, and historians still argue about how much personality these animals truly had versus how much personality soldiers projected onto them. You drop your knapsack on the ground and stretch your back. The air feels cooler here, touched by the faint scent of pine and wood smoke from a small group already beginning to gather fallen branches. The light is slanting low now, brushed with warm tones that soften everything they touch. It is a good hour for building camp, a calm hour. A sergeant moves along the clearing, pointing with the confidence of someone who has done this countless times. He marks where the company streets will run and where each tent row should stand. The officers follow, offering quiet corrections and adjustments. They debate angles, distances, and the best use of the grove's natural shelter. You overhear one lieutenant argue that the tent should angle slightly toward the east to catch morning light. Another prefers west-facing tents, so the men are not blinded at dawn. Historians still argue about how consistent such decisions were across armies, but in this moment you can see the importance of small choices shaping daily comfort. You kneel next to your pack, and begin unpacking the rolled canvas of your tent. The fabric is rough and stiff from repeated use, smelling faintly of last night's dew and the smoke of a dozen campfires. You shake it out gently. A private next to you does the same, and the two of you exchange a quiet nod of solidarity. No one speaks loudly right now. The hush of impending dusk has settled naturally over the grove. You gather the wooden poles and stakes, their surfaces worn smooth by months of handling. The ridgepole has a small notch carved into one end, a mark made by a previous occupant who probably wanted to identify it in a pile of identical pieces. Such personal touches appear often in surviving equipment, though historians debate whether carving such notches was encouraged, discouraged, or simply tolerated by officers who had bigger concerns. You drive the first stake into the ground. The soil is softer than you expect, but firm enough to hold. A dull, satisfying thump accompanies each strike. Soon, the outline of your tent takes shape. A low canvas wedge, simple and predictable, yet reassuring in its familiarity. You loop the ridgepole into place, then lift the canvas as the private beside you helps raise the far end. Together, you stretch the guy ropes taut, tying them with practice motions that require little thought. Around you, tents bloom across the grove like cream-colored blossoms. Each one rises quietly as men settle into their routines. A drummer boy helps pitch a tent twice his size, his small hands surprisingly deft. A sergeant nearby adjusts his tent stakes with exaggerated precision, muttering that crooked lines ruin his peace of mind. Someone else swears lightly at a stubborn knot before laughing at his own frustration. Once your tent stands secure, you begin smoothing the interior. You lay the ground cloth flat, pulling its corners snugly. You place your blanket inside, rolling it loosely for easy access. The air inside the tent still holds the day's warmth, but will cool quickly once night fully arrives. You kneel for a moment, listening to the faint rustling around you. This quiet construction, this gentle rearrangement of the world into a temporary home, feels grounding after the long march. You step outside and join a small group gathering firewood. Fallen branches lie scattered between the trees, some brittle and dry, others damp but usable if split. You pick up an armful while the others debate where to place the fires. Fire pits in camp are rarely random. They serve as social centers and practical stations for cooking, cleaning, and conversation. Tonight, the sergeant suggests arranging 3 small pits rather than one central one. Since the grove is not perfectly level, no one objects. You help stack the kindling, forming a cone that leans into a neat shape. As the first sparks catch, the fire crackles to life with a soft rush of orange. The glow warms your hands and your face. Men drift toward it instinctively, forming a loose semicircle. A corporal begins unpacking the rations, setting aside what will be cooked tonight and what must be saved for tomorrow. Salt, pork, beans, a handful of dried apples, and the inevitable hardtack appear in the dimming light. Someone remarks that the beans will need soaking. Someone else says that soaking will only improve them if the water is clean. The nearest kettle clangs agreeably as it is set down. You step back to examine the camp taking shape. Company streets align themselves with surprising neatness. The wagons form a protective barrier at the edge of the grove. Horses graze quietly where officers tethered them earlier. A few men sit near tree trunks, scribbling notes into diaries or folding small pieces of paper to send home whenever courier service next arrives. It is these small domestic motions that give winter quarters their character, even if this is only the beginning. A private holds up a bent tent stake as if it is some archaeological treasure. He claims he found it half buried near a stump, proof that another regiment once camped here. Someone argues that tree stumps exist everywhere and that he is imagining the connection. The private insists he can tell. Historians still debate how often soldiers stumbled across remnants of previous camps, but the idea of living among traces of those who passed before you lends the moment a quiet sense of continuity. As the fire spreads its warmth, someone pulls out a fiddle. He tunes it slowly, plucking strings and adjusting pegs by ear. The first notes are hesitant, drifting through the grove like early fireflies. The tune grows steadier, gathering shape. It is not lively. It is soft, meditative, suited for men who have marched all day and now crave rest more than revelry. The music mingles with the smell of smoke, the soft murmur of unpacking, and the occasional clink of tinware. Together, these sounds create a gentle tapestry that settles across the camp like a comforting quilt. You take a moment to sit on a fallen log, letting your legs relax. The warmth of the fire seeps into your boots. You feel the pleasant fatigue of honest travel and steady labor. The light dims further, and the sky above turns a deep violet. You notice a single star emerging between the branches, faint but steady. Officers wander through the grove, checking tent arrangements and reminding men to keep their gear organized. Their voices carry a blend of authority and softness, reflecting the calm of this evening rather than the strictness of inspection. You watch them confer near their own larger tents, which will soon hold tables, lanterns, and perhaps even a chair or two. But that contrast will come later. For now, the grove becomes a temporary town of canvas and firelight, friendly and quiet. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with the scent of pine and smoke. This, you realize, is the beginning of winter quarters, a place built slowly, thoughtfully, with each man adding a small piece to the whole. As the fire settles into a steady glow and the last of the tents stand firm, you feel the day's weight slip gently from your shoulders. The march is behind you, the night is ahead, and the new camp, with all its coming routines and stories, awaits patiently. You settle into the evening routine as lanterns glow, minor paperwork drifts across makeshift desks, and subtle worries stir beneath calm conversation. Night settles over the grove slowly, like a wool blanket pulled gently across the camp. The fires that warm the men during setup ebb to glowing coals, and lanterns begin to appear one by one, their soft yellow halos floating between the rows of canvas. You notice how the light seems to thicken the air, catching in the smoke and turning the clearing into a quiet constellation of its own. It is a peaceful hour, and yet beneath that peace lies the subtle hum of worry that always stirs when soldiers settle after a long march. You sit near your tent, easing back against a log that has become an unofficial seat. Your legs feel heavy in the pleasant way that comes after steady travel. The warmth of the fire beside you brings a soft glow to your face. Someone ladles a bit of broth into your tin cup, and you sip it gratefully. The taste is simple: salt, beans, and whatever seasoning a creative cook managed to coax from limited supplies. It is better than plain hardtack, which is always an encouraging sign. Around you, the camp settles into its evening persona. A few soldiers cluster around a low table cobbled from planks found near the grove. They sort through small stacks of paperwork, a reminder that even in an army built on movement and improvisation, lists, rolls, and reports still rule the routine. One man reads from a ledger, jotting notes with a blunt pencil. Another signs his name with slow concentration, handwriting looping unevenly across the page. Paperwork might not be exciting, but it anchors the regiment to its duties. A corporal nearby begins calling the roll, his voice soft but steady. Men answer one by one, some offering a quiet "here," others lifting a hand instead of speaking. The names drift through the lantern light like gentle echoes. You listen as each man confirms his presence, a reminder that despite the miles and the mud, the regiment remains whole tonight. Your own sergeant eventually wanders past, carrying a lantern whose handle creaks with every step. He pauses to glance over your section of the company street, checking that the tents stand firm and the fire pits stay contained. His expression is thoughtful, softened by tiredness. You nod at him, and he nods back before moving on. These small exchanges carry more reassurance than lengthy speeches. The officers' lanterns burn brighter at the far end of camp. You can see their silhouettes moving within the glow, leaning over tables made from stacked crates. They consult maps and scribble notes, planning tomorrow's tasks. Even from this distance, you can sense the mental weight they carry. Some officers worry about the supply wagons, some about the discipline of the company, some about the weather and the terrain ahead. Command in the 1860s is as much emotional labor as logistical, though official reports rarely mention that part. You pull your blanket around your shoulders, letting its warmth settle over you like a soft embrace. The wool smells faintly of river water and pine needles, a scent that has become strangely comforting. Your damp socks now hang from a rope outside your tent, drying by lantern glow. They sway slightly when a breeze passes, and you imagine they are signaling their own quiet satisfaction at being clean again. Nearby, a pair of soldiers sit side by side, polishing brass belt plates with small cloths. Each plate bears the familiar raised letters that mark your service. They rub in slow circles, their motions rhythmical and almost meditative. Every so often, one soldier stops to inspect his work, turning the plate to catch the lantern light. He grins when he sees the shine growing. Despite the rigors of the day, men still take pride in these small details. As you watch, one of them tells a story about a rumor circulating through the regiment. Supposedly, a nearby company received a crate full of new wool blankets by mistake, and no one is sure if they should turn them over or quietly accept the windfall. Another man suggests the blankets will probably be reclaimed by morning. Another claims they heard the blankets were miscounted at a depot 3 towns back. Historians still argue about how frequent such supply mix-ups were, but the men in camp delight in these stories. They provide a little spark of amusement that keeps spirits from sinking. A lantern flickers behind you, and you turn to see a soldier sitting cross-legged near his tent, writing a letter home. His knees form a makeshift desk, and his lantern rests beside him, casting a warm pool of light on his page. His posture is slightly hunched, as though he leans not only toward his words, but also toward the imagined presence of the person he writes to. You catch a glimpse of his handwriting, slanted and careful. He pauses often, tapping his pencil against his chin as he searches for the right phrase. Letters from camp carry not only news but emotion, condensed into a few paragraphs that must travel far across towns and time. Another soldier approaches him and asks if he needs help spelling a particular word. The writer laughs softly and admits he does. They debate the spelling with friendly confidence. This small interaction hints at the wide range of literacy in regiments of the 18th century, and historians still debate just how many soldiers could write comfortably. In the quiet lantern glow, such distinctions feel unimportant. What matters is that stories and thoughts make their way onto paper at all. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the soft crackle of distant fires lull you. The soft hum of conversation wraps around you like an old quilt. Men talk about home, joking about the food they missed or the way their families would react if they saw them now, covered in dust but content. Others talk about tomorrow, wondering whether the march will continue or if the regiment will be allowed to rest. Some worry quietly about the winter ahead. The thought of frost creeping across canvas, of stiff morning fingers, of ground hardened by cold, sits in the back of everyone's mind. You feel it too. The light tremor of anticipation that accompanies every change of season. Still, the worries are gentle tonight. They linger but do not press. The lanterns soften them. The campfire smoke carries them away. You adjust your blanket and let the warmth seep into your bones. A soldier begins humming a lullaby he claims his mother used to sing. The melody is simple and soothing. A few men join in quietly. None of them match the tune perfectly, but somehow that makes it feel more real, like a collective remembering of something half forgotten. You notice one officer stepping out of his tent, stretching his shoulders, and taking a slow breath as if releasing the weight of the day. He looks at the sky, now filled with stars, and then back at the grove, illuminated by lanterns and coals. For a moment, he seems simply human, not someone burdened with decisions. You lean back, feeling the ground beneath you, solid and cool. You take a slow sip from your tin cup. The broth has cooled, but the flavor remains comforting. The lantern beside you flickers gently, casting shifting shadows that look like little waves across your tent flap. The night deepens, the quiet grows thicker, and you feel yourself drifting into a soft, reflective calm, knowing that winter quarters will soon offer routines of their own, shaped by days like this. You notice how tiny objects fall from clothing during daily tasks, and understand why archaeologists later find so many scattered pieces. You rise the next morning with the faint memory of lantern glow lingering behind your eyelids, the way soft yellow light clung to canvas and soothed the camp into gentle stillness. The grove is quiet now except for a few early risers tending the fire pits. Pale sunlight filters through the trees, carrying with it the crisp scent of dew settling on pine needles. You stretch slowly, shifting your blanket aside, and step out of your tent into the cool morning air. As you move toward the fire to warm your hands, your boot nudges something small and metallic. It skitters lightly across the ground like a startled beetle. Curious, you kneel and pick it up. A brass button rests in your palm, faintly tarnished, its embossed eagle still recognizable despite the wear. You turn it over. The shank on the back has snapped, and you realize it must have come loose from someone's coat as they bent or stretched or simply walked. You look around for the owner, but no one seems to be searching for a missing button. In truth, buttons fall off so frequently in these camps that most soldiers do not bother looking for them unless it is their last one. You slip the button into a pocket so you can ask around later, though odds are that whoever lost it will shrug and say they expected it to happen eventually. You stand and brush a bit of dirt from your knees. As you do, you notice another small object near the fire pit, a triangular piece of bone that once belonged to a button on a pair of trousers. The idea of bone buttons often surprises newcomers, but they are common in this era, especially among enlisted men. They are simple, sturdy, and cheaper than brass. Many soldiers even carve replacements when needed, though historians still argue about how many men actually did this carving themselves, versus relying on sutlers and supply depots. You pocket the bone piece as well, not because you need it, but because you find yourself fascinated by how many small items accumulate in a camp. When archaeologists study old Civil War sites, they often find scatterings of broken buttons, bent buckles, shank fragments, and other tiny artifacts. Standing here, you understand why. Every morning and evening brings countless small moments when a thread frays, a strap slips, or a pocket coughs up its contents into the dirt. You move closer to the fire, where a few soldiers sit, warming their hands. One notices the brass button in your palm and laughs quietly. He tells you he lost 3 buttons last week and has since given up trying to keep track. He shows you his coat. 2 spots on the front bear hastily sewn replacements, mismatched in size but functional enough. You smile and promise to ask around. He shrugs, says to keep the button if no one claims it. Extras, he notes, always come in handy. You sip a bit of weak morning coffee, the familiar smoky bitterness settling comfortably on your tongue. Someone tosses a twig into the fire, sending up a brief spray of sparks. As the flames crackle, you find yourself studying the ground again. Here and there, small glints catch your eye. A tiny bent nail, a scrap of thread, part of a tin clasp. None of these items feel important on their own, yet each tells a quiet story of movement, fatigue, and improvisation. A soldier walks up carrying his coat over one arm. He complains that he has lost yet another cuff button. You show him the brass button you found, but he shakes his head. Wrong type, wrong size. His coat requires a slightly larger pattern. He sighs and begins rummaging through a pouch sewn into his haversack. Inside, he keeps a tiny collection of salvageable hardware. Stubs of broken buttons, folded thread papers, and a strange assortment of mismatched fasteners. You watch as he selects a suitable replacement and begins sewing it on with quick, practiced motions. He mentions that men often swap buttons like trading cards. Some prefer the sturdier brass, others like the lightweight bone. Some go out of their way to acquire fancier pieces from sutlers. Whether this reflects practical need or personal taste varies from man to man. Historians still debate how standardized uniform parts truly were from regiment to regiment, though field experience suggests variability was the norm. As you watch him sew, you hear a small clink behind you. You turn and see a corporal kneeling near a tent, retrieving a tiny tin buckle from the dirt. He holds it up triumphantly. It belongs to his knapsack strap, he explains. He lost it yesterday and suspected it might show up during morning cleanup. You help him inspect the strap, and together you thread the buckle back into place. He thanks you, then moves on to inspect the tents of his squad, calling out reminders about gear organization. You walk toward the company street, noticing how morning activity has kicked into gear. Men shake out blankets, sweep dirt from tent flaps, and check the contents of their haversacks. Each movement sends tiny items tumbling. A spoon falls and lands with a dull thunk. A tin match case slips from someone's pocket. A piece of string appears on the ground, origin unknown. You bend to pick up the string and coil it neatly. One soldier tells you to keep it. You never know, he says, when you might need extra twine in the field. You tuck it away, amused by how proudly he endorses the usefulness of stray string. As you continue walking, the supply wagons shift into activity as well. A teamster rearranges crates, and as he lifts one, something small drops from the wagon bed. You catch the faint glimmer of another button, this one flattened as though stepped on long ago. You pick it up and show it to him. He grins and says that wagon beds are notorious for eating small objects. He swears that once he lost an entire tin cup to a crack in the boards. Whether this is true or simply the folklore of a tired teamster, you cannot say. The morning sun rises higher, its beams illuminating more small treasures scattered across the ground. In the soft light, the camp resembles a quiet trove of humble artifacts, each waiting for someone to notice. You realize how easily these bits blend into the dirt, how many are forgotten or ignored, and how many will remain buried long after the regiment moves on. You wander back to your tent and place the collected items on a small cloth. 2 buttons, the bone fragment, the coil of string, and a tiny metal clasp. You do not need any of them desperately, but their presence comforts you. They are tokens of camp life, small reminders that the world here is made of many fragile pieces held together by the hands of tired, ordinary men. Nearby, someone begins telling a story about a soldier who once sewed a button onto his coat so poorly that it flew off during drill and hit his sergeant in the shin. The tale earns laughter, though the storyteller insists it might be true. You lean back on your heels, smiling at the thought. As you listen, the morning noise blends into a pleasant backdrop. The camp hums, tents rustle, tin cups clatter, boots thud lightly. All around you, uniform bits and buttons lie hidden in plain sight, telling their gentle stories to whoever cares to look. You breathe the cool air and feel the day beginning to unfold once more. The march will resume soon, but for now, you enjoy this moment of quiet discovery, letting the stories of these small artifacts settle into your mind like warm embers. You examine your tin cup, skillet, and utensils while thinking about how often such items were lost or replaced. The sun creeps higher through the trees, warming the edges of the grove and turning the cold breath of morning into something gentler. As the camp stirs toward mid-morning, you find yourself drawn toward the simple tools of daily life that clutter the spaces between tents. Tin cups hang from pack straps, mess pans lie beside fire pits. Spoons, forks, and the occasional folding knife clatter as men prepare to clean up from breakfast or sort their kits for the next march. You settle on a wooden crate near your tent and loosen the ties that hold your own tin cup in place. When you lift it into your hands, it catches the sunlight with a dull silver-grey glint. The cup is dented on one side, a flaw earned back during the long slog through the muddy road yesterday. You rub your thumb against the dented patch, feeling the texture of metal shaped not by craftsmanship but by the rigors of travel and use. Tin cups in the 1860s are marvels of simplicity. Thin, light, quick to heat over a fire, and sometimes too quick. More than one soldier has scorched his fingertips after misjudging how rapidly tin transmits heat. A private sitting beside the fire reminds you of that fact now. He blows sharply across the rim of his cup, muttering that he forgot the laws of physics again. His friend laughs and says the cup is smarter than all of them. You set the cup on your knee and examine the seam that runs vertically along its side. The solder line has begun to weaken, a common fate for cups that endure too many drastic temperature changes. You make a mental note to borrow someone's soldering kit if it begins leaking. Soldiers often repair their own cups with whatever patching materials they have, though historians still debate how frequently men carried such repair tools versus trading for new cups from sutlers. Beside you lies your small skillet, its handle long and narrow, ideal for suspending over a fire. The surface bears a darkened patina from months of cooking beans, pork, and the occasional luxury of pan-fried apples. You tilt it, watching the sheen shift across the metal. A thin crack runs near the edge, but it remains serviceable. You recall hearing someone claim that cracked skillets sing when heated. Whether this is superstition or simply poetic imagination remains unclear. You tap the skillet lightly with your spoon. It rings gently, like a muffled bell. You retrieve your eating utensils from your haversack, a spoon, a fork, and a small sheath knife. Each piece bears its own wear. The spoon is slightly bent at the rim. The fork has one tine that angles just a little differently from the rest. The knife's handle shows the faint marks of someone carving their initials into it long ago, perhaps trying to ensure it did not vanish into another man's gear pile. Tools travel between hands easily in camp. A fork borrowed for one meal may cross 3 tents by the next morning. Men track their gear with surprising informality, trusting in the camp's loose economy of borrowing and returning. You polish the spoon with a scrap of cloth, removing a bit of dried broth. As you do, you overhear two soldiers debating which tools are most essential. One swears by the spoon, declaring that he could survive with just that. Another insists that a knife is more important because it serves countless uses beyond eating: cutting string, shaving wood, sharpening pencils, and prying open stubborn ration boxes. Historians note similar arguments in letters and diaries, though opinions vary as widely as personalities. A few feet away, a corporal rummages through a pile of mess gear that someone spread out on a blanket. Odd tools appear in the assortment: a folding tin grater, a tiny spice tin, a battered ladle, and even a pair of small tongs. You pick up the grater and hold it carefully. Its edges are sharp from long wear. The corporal laughs quietly and tells you that one man in the company swears he can improve any meal by adding grated hardtack crumbs. Whether this culinary innovation produces greatness or misery is a matter of subjective debate. You return the grater to the blanket and notice a curious object: a tin cone with a tiny handle. You lift it. It is an old-fashioned coffee drip cone, meant for making a small, concentrated brew. The soldier who owns it, a wiry man with alert eyes, explains that he acquired it from a sutler last year and refuses to part with it. He claims it makes the finest coffee in the regiment. Others tease him mercilessly, but the man simply smiles and says proof lies in the taste. He offers you a demonstration later in the evening, and you accept with warm curiosity. Nearby, a seasoned private sharpens his knife on a small whetstone. His strokes are calm and methodical, forming a soft scraping rhythm. He explains that dull blades are more dangerous than sharp ones. You nod, though you are mildly distracted by the way his knife seems to catch every spark of sunlight. He pauses mid-stroke and jokes that he has sharpened this blade so many times it is thinner than a fiddle string. You cannot tell whether this is an exaggeration, but the sentiment feels true. A few men move toward the wagons to check their canteens, utensils, and spare gear. One finds a tin plate with a deep bend. He flattens it by pressing it against a wagon wheel, a common trick that soldiers swear by. Another man retrieves a long-handled ladle and describes how he once watched a cook use it to chase raccoons away from the garbage pile. Whether this memory is true or embellished hardly matters. The laughter it provokes warms the air more than the morning sun. You return to cleaning your cup. The soot around its rim tells stories of countless fires, some friendly and crackling, others sputtering in the rain. Tinware carries memories in a way more permanent than letters. Dents reveal the shape of a fall. Dark patches reveal a moment of burning stew, and faint tasting metallic notes reveal how often the cup has held hastily boiled water. As you wipe the inside, you hear someone mention that archaeologists frequently find old tin cups in trenches or fire pits when investigating Civil War sites. Many were discarded when soldiers acquired new ones, or when cracks made them unusable. You study your cup again, imagining how easily it could be lost during a hurried march or forgotten in tall grass. The idea feels both sad and oddly poetic. These humble tools form the heartbeat of daily life, yet they vanish quietly, leaving tiny metal echoes for future researchers to uncover. You place your utensils back into your haversack, examining the ties that hold them in place. You give each tie a small tug, ensuring they will not clatter noisily during a march. The last thing you want is to become the unwilling percussionist of the company. A soldier jokes about this often, swearing that the loudest man in the regiment is always some poor fellow whose fork taps his cup with every step. As the morning continues, men around you finish polishing, mending, and organizing their tools. A few gather near a fire where a small tin pot boils. Someone adds a pinch of salt from a tiny packet. Someone else stirs with a stick because he misplaced his spoon. Mess gear, it seems, is endlessly adaptable. You lean back and feel a sense of satisfaction wash over you. Your tools are clean, your cup is patched and serviceable, your skillet is seasoned, and your utensils feel familiar in your hands, like old friends who rarely complain. These objects may be simple, but they anchor you to the daily rhythm of camp life, giving shape to meals, chores, and quiet moments between marches. You rise with your cup in hand, feeling the weight of a morning well spent. The sound of tin, the smell of wood smoke, and the friendly murmur of voices weave together, forming a small, gentle world of their own. The day moves on, and with it, the stories carried by every dented piece of metal in camp. You watch companions read letters from home while hearing others discuss who can read what, touching on the ongoing historical debate about literacy rates. The sun has climbed just high enough to warm the tops of the pines, and a gentle lull settles over the grove as the morning's chores wind down. Fires crackle softer now, their flames reduced to friendly embers. A few men linger over late cups of coffee while others lounge in patches of sunlight like contented cats. It is the kind of hour in camp when letters often come out of their pockets, creased and worn from repeated readings. You settle on a log near your tent, stretching your legs and letting the warmth seep into your boots. Nearby, a private pulls a packet of folded papers from his haversack. The edges of the envelopes have softened to a velvet-like fuzz, evidence that he has carried them through miles of mud, rain, and dust. He opens the top letter with careful fingers, smoothing it across his knee. The moment he begins reading, his whole posture shifts, his eyes relax, his breathing deepens. Whatever the letter contains, the simple act of reading it draws him into a different emotional space. The camp around him may bustle, but the world inside the letter is quieter, shaped by the voice of someone far away. You glance at another soldier sitting near the fire pit. He holds a letter up closer to the light, squinting at the neat handwriting. He works through each line slowly, mouthing the words, pausing often. The man beside him leans over to help, gently tracing a line with his finger. Between the two of them, the meaning emerges. Their shared focus feels intimate and kind, like two people decoding a treasure map rather than simply reading mail. A few feet away, a corporal reads aloud from a letter addressed to three brothers serving in the same company. Their sister has written home, updating them on the harvest, the neighbor's new barn, and the antics of a cousin's mischievous dog. The corporal's voice rises and falls like a soft tide, and the brothers listen with smiles that brighten their faces. When he reaches the part about their mother sending them each a small charm sewn into the lining of a handkerchief, they cheer quietly and pat their pockets to make sure the tokens are indeed there. You find yourself reflecting on how varied the reading habits of soldiers are. Some devour every word with practiced ease. Others rely on companions to read aloud. Some write pages in a smooth, looping script. Others dictate short notes to men with steadier hands. Historians still debate the exact literacy rates among Civil War regiments. Diaries, letters, and muster records provide clues, but the truth remains layered and complex. What you see in this grove suggests that literacy exists along a wide spectrum rather than as an either-or skill. A private sitting near you announces triumphantly that he finally learned how to spell the word necessary after seeing it appear in 3 different letters from home. He says the trick is remembering that it holds 2 S letters but only 1 C. Another soldier insists it is the other way around. A friendly argument breaks out. You watch as the 2 men scribble the word in the dirt with sticks, each convinced they are correct. Eventually, a sergeant with a confident stride passes by, notices the debate, and settles it by spelling the word aloud in slow, exaggerated syllables. The men nod with mock solemnity, though you suspect they will forget the spelling the moment they walk away. Nearby, a man sorts through a small stack of envelopes tied with a faded blue ribbon. Each letter begins with careful greetings and affectionate hope that he is eating well and staying warm. He reads them with reverence, as though each line deserves its own moment. When he finishes, he folds the letters and ties them again, slipping them back into a weathered pocket near his heart. A younger soldier sits alone under a tree, staring at a blank page. His pencil hovers uncertainly, as if unsure how to begin. You approach quietly and sit beside him. He confesses that writing makes him nervous. His thoughts move faster than his hand, he says, and he worries his family will judge the roughness of his script. You assure him gently that no family waits for penmanship. They wait for news, any news, written in the familiar voice of someone they miss. He nods, exhales, and writes the first line. It is crooked and uneven, but sincere. He begins with the weather, then adds a note about the march, then mentions a friend, then laughs at himself for having more to say than he expected. Words grow easier as he writes, flowing from the pencil like water once the first pebble is moved aside. A veteran soldier nearby opens a thick letter and reads it aloud to 3 men leaning in close. The letter describes a church gathering back home, complete with singing, potluck dishes, and children chasing each other in circles around a yard. The details are gentle and vivid. An apricot pie that looked prettier than it tasted. A storm that passed overhead with dramatic thunder but very little rain. A stray cat that decided it preferred the family's porch to the barn. The men chuckle at the stories, their eyes drifting into the memories of their own homes. One soldier mentions that he has not received a letter in weeks. His voice is light, but you sense the ache behind it. Another pats his shoulder and offers to share his own mail, saying that stories from any home are better than none from yours. The first man smiles, accepting the kindness. Soldiers in these camps exchange letters freely, reading each other's messages as if weaving a broader tapestry of home across the group. A sudden gust of wind scatters a few loose envelopes from a crate near the wagons. You and several others rush to help gather them. One letter lands near a shallow rut in the dirt, narrowly avoiding a muddy puddle. You retrieve it and scan the name on the front. You hand it to its owner, who clutches it gratefully. He says his wife writes in a style he calls crowded, meaning she fills every inch of the page with close, tiny handwriting. He laughs, says she worries that she must fit as much love as possible into each letter. You imagine her at a kitchen table late at night, dipping her pen again and again, each line an invisible thread that reaches across miles. As the wind dies, the grove settles back into tranquility. Men fold letters with care. Some tuck them under hats. Some place them inside shirt pockets. Some store them in bundles inside haversacks, wrapped in cloth to protect them from rain. Letters are as essential as food, many say. They nourish something beyond the body. You sit with your own small scrap of paper, fresh and unmarked. You write slowly at first, capturing simple details, the march, the mud, the new camp. Then you find yourself writing more, the sound of the fire, the kindness of companions, the way the morning light warms the tents. Words come easier than you expect. Perhaps this is the quiet magic of the grove. Or perhaps it is the influence of all the stories drifting around you. When you finish, you fold the page and tuck it into your haversack. It will travel with you until courier service arrives. Whether it reaches its destination quickly or slowly is anyone's guess. The mail system during wartime is heroic but imperfect. Letters sometimes arrive out of order, or months late, or not at all. Historians note this inconsistency often, yet the men continue writing because each letter holds hope. You look around as the grove brightens and the morning turns toward midday. Soldiers speak softly, a few hum tunes as they finish reading. The camp feels lighter somehow, buoyed by distant voices carried on envelopes and ink. In this quiet hour, the world feels smaller, kinder, connected by the simple power of words. You stumble upon an old folded letter tucked in a tent corner, imagining the story behind why it was never sent. The midday light softens as clouds drift lazily across the sky, casting brief shadows across the grove. You feel the slow contentment that follows a morning of small tasks and quiet conversation. Some men gather near the fire to reheat leftover coffee. Others sit on logs mending socks or whittling bits of wood into small trinkets. A few nap with hats pulled over their eyes. You decide to return to your tent to put away your writing supplies, still thinking about the letters you saw earlier and the emotions they carried through the air. Your tent feels warm inside, the canvas glowing with filtered sunlight. You kneel to straighten your blanket and shift your haversack so it rests more neatly against the far pole. As you move the pack, something crinkles faintly beneath it, a sound you do not recognize as belonging to any of your items. Curious, you lift the haversack and see a small, folded piece of paper lying half tucked into the crease where the ground cloth meets the canvas wall. It is dusty along the edges, the way things become when forgotten for some time. You pick it up carefully, brushing away a light layer of dirt. The paper is thick, slightly yellowed, and creased many times over. The fold is tight, like someone had closed it with deliberate care. You check for a name on the outside, but find none. No envelope, no address. Just a folded sheet, humble and unassuming. You hesitate for a moment. This is not yours. But it was left behind, and something about the paper feels lonely, as though it has been waiting quietly for someone to notice. You unfold it slowly, taking care not to tear the fragile corners. The handwriting inside appears in a neat, steady script, probably written by someone with practiced confidence. Each line curves gracefully across the page. The letter begins with a simple salutation. My dear brother. Your chest tightens slightly as you read the first few words. It does not feel like a private intrusion so much as an unexpected window into someone's life. A story suspended, unfinished. The writer describes the camp they were in at the time, noting how the weather had turned colder and how the men kept spirits high despite long marches. The tone is warm, hopeful, undeniably human. You continue reading. The writer explains that they had been thinking about home more often lately, especially as winter approached. They mention missing the family hearth, the smell of baking bread, and the sound of their brother's laughter. They talk about the way the frost settled on the tents early in the morning, turning each canvas roof into a pale mirror for the rising sun. The descriptions are gentle yet vivid. Then you reach the part where the writer says they hope to send the letter as soon as the courier came through. But there is no closing, no signature. The last sentence ends just as the writer describes hearing the call for the next drill. The letter simply stops there, as if interrupted mid-thought. You look at the bottom of the page and notice that the ink trails slightly, like the pen was lifted hastily before the words were fully finished. You sit back on your heels, the letter resting lightly on your lap. It feels weightless yet full of meaning. The tent around you falls quiet. You listen to the camp outside, faint footsteps crunching leaves, the muted crackle of the fire, the low hum of a few men chatting. This moment feels suspended in time, as though the letter holds a small echo from a past day layered atop the present. Your mind wanders to who might have written it. Perhaps it belonged to someone who shared this tent before your unit arrived. Camps often get reused, their grounds bearing traces of those who came before. Maybe the writer stuffed the letter into a pocket, intending to finish it later. Maybe they lost it while packing. Maybe they thought they would rewrite it more neatly. Or perhaps they simply forgot it in the rush of marching orders and never returned. Historians still debate how many letters were lost or never mailed, though surviving examples suggest the number was higher than most imagine. You read the letter again, more slowly this time. In the middle, the writer mentions a small carved whistle their brother once gave them. They keep it tied inside their haversack, they say, and sometimes hold it when the nights feel long. You look at your own gear, wondering if the whistle remains somewhere in the grove, misplaced or buried beneath layers of pine needles and dirt. The thought feels strangely comforting, as though personal tokens have a way of staying connected to their stories even when separated. You fold the letter gently, following the original creases as best you can. The paper feels fragile in your hands, yet its words linger with surprising strength. You place it on your blanket, thinking about what to do with it. Returning it to its place on the ground feels wrong. Throwing it away feels unthinkable. You consider asking around to see if anyone recognizes the handwriting. The camp is full of shifting faces and fluid stories. Someone might know the missing writer. You step out of your tent holding the folded sheet. The sunlight warms your face, grounding you in the present. A few soldiers glance at the letter curiously, and you approach one who has been in the regiment longer than you. You ask if he recognizes the script. He studies it for a moment and shakes his head, though he remarks that the handwriting is elegant enough to belong to a clerk or someone accustomed to paperwork. Another soldier looks it over and says he once saw a similar style in letters belonging to a private who transferred to a different company earlier in the year. He cannot recall the man's name, but he remembers hearing that the soldier kept a tight bundle of letters from home. Whether this letter belonged to him or someone else remains unclear. You return to your tent and sit down, the letter still safely folded. You think again about the unfinished line near the bottom. Perhaps the writer intended to return to it after drill. Perhaps they planned to include news from later in the day. Perhaps life simply moved faster than the ink could dry. The beauty of such forgotten letters lies not in what is known, but in what remains imagined. You tuck the letter into an interior pocket of your haversack, resting it near your own folded sheet. The two pieces of paper sit together, one finished, one lingering in a state of perpetual becoming. You feel a quiet responsibility to keep it safe, even if its author never returns to claim it. Outside, the camp continues its soft bustle. Someone sings a low tune. A kettle lid rattles lightly in the breeze. A pair of soldiers laugh at a joke about the muddy road you all marched yesterday. Life moves steadily, gently forward. Yet for a moment, you remain still, aware that you carry a small echo from another soldier's past. Not a dramatic relic, Not a grand artifact, but a simple folded letter meant for a brother far away. A letter that paused mid-sentence and stayed there, waiting for someone to find it. You take a slow breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle softly. Then you step outside again, the letter safe in your pack, ready to rejoin the rhythm of the day. You move through the more furnished officer quarters and feel the contrast between their space and your simple enlisted fire pit. You rise from your brief rest with the forgotten letter still tucked safely in your haversack, its presence warm and grounding. The camp has shifted into its easy afternoon rhythm, that quiet period between chores and supper, when men wander, tidy, talk, or simply stretch their legs. A corporal calls for a few volunteers to fetch more firewood. Someone else asks if anyone has seen the company cook. Farther down the line, a private practices fiddling the same 3 measures of a tune over and over, convinced he is improving. You smile at the familiarity of it all. You decide to take a slow walk toward the officers' section of the grove. You have no formal reason to be there, but the drift of camp life often brings men to the edges of places they do not normally linger. Besides, the officers' tents glow with a quiet curiosity. You have seen glimpses before, lantern light spilling through canvas, shadows of chairs and tables, the faint murmur of planning and paperwork. Today, with the camp calm and your chores complete, the contrast feels worth exploring. The path there is soft, with pine needles. Each step makes a muted crunch, like walking on a quilted forest floor. A light breeze carries the smell of coffee grounds and damp earth. You follow the sound of low voices until the officers' tents rise ahead in neat rows. Their canvas looks cleaner than the enlisted tents, though you suspect this has more to do with location than privilege. The officers stake their grounds on a gentle rise where drainage is better and mud less likely to swallow boots wholesale. You pause at the edge to observe the scene. A captain stands outside his tent speaking with a lieutenant, both studying a folded map that flutters slightly in the breeze. Their lantern rests on a wooden crate beside them, illuminating the inked lines of rivers and roads. You notice how their tent flaps are rolled neatly and tied with cord, making the entrances feel more like doorways than simple openings. You approach respectfully, lingering far enough not to intrude, but close enough to observe the small details that distinguish these quarters. One officer's tent opens onto a compact arrangement of furniture, a folding cot, a narrow desk built from wooden planks, and a small chair with canvas stretched tightly across its frame. Such furniture pieces are not luxurious by modern standards, but compared to the bedroll on the ground that you use each night, they feel remarkably refined. A lantern hangs from the ridgepole of another tent, its warm circle of light revealing tidy stacks of paperwork organized in wooden trays. A pair of boots rests beside the cot, polished more thoroughly than any enlisted man's boots have looked in months. A small framed photograph sits on a crate, the image faint and sepia-toned. The officer to whom it belongs occasionally glances at it mid-task, as if drawing quiet strength from the face captured there. As you walk past the first row of tents, a lieutenant notices you and gives a polite nod. You return it and comment lightly on the neatness of their setup. He chuckles, adjusting his jacket. He says that furniture helps him keep his thoughts in order, though he admits the desk wobbles whenever he writes too firmly. He taps it with his knuckles to demonstrate, and the legs shift slightly, giving a tiny squeak. This earns a warm laugh from you both. You continue, moving gently between tents. Another officer sits on a folding stool, darning a tear in his coat with far more precision than most enlisted men muster. He explains that a clean, well-mended uniform is expected when dealing with paperwork, inspections, and visits from higher command. Whether this expectation is truly enforced or merely tradition is something historians still argue about. Inside one tent, you glimpse a compact bookcase made from stacked cracker boxes. A few slim volumes rest on its shelves. A book of poetry, a military manual, and what appears to be a well-worn Bible. Soldiers often share books across ranks, but officers tend to collect them more regularly. Reading material becomes a welcome escape from the tedium and worry of long days. You wonder whether the private who struggled earlier with his letter ever imagined officers passing their evenings with books and lantern light. You find yourself drawn toward a tent where soft music hums beneath the canvas wall. You slow your steps and realize an officer is humming a tune as he sorts his papers, the melody steady and soothing. It reminds you faintly of the fiddler's repetitive practice earlier, the two melodies weaving together in your mind as if the camp itself hums a quiet tune. A captain sits at a desk in another tent, writing with deliberate strokes. His brow is furrowed, not in frustration but in concentration. He dips his pen frequently, the lantern beside him illuminating the ink with a golden shimmer. A half-empty mug of coffee rests nearby, the rim ringed with soot. Officers may have more creature comforts, but they share the same simple beverages and the same smoky flavor that permeates every cup in camp. You notice that officers also tend to have slightly higher walls of privacy. Their tents stand spaced more widely, giving them pockets of quiet where they can plan, think, and correspond. Yet even here, the division is gentle rather than harsh. A few enlisted men step through to deliver messages or report on tasks. They speak respectfully, but not fearfully. The officers respond with tired warmth, often thanking them or offering clarifications about evening duties. You overhear two officers discussing whether the regiment will remain here long enough to build sturdier winter structures. One believes they will move again before the frost deepens. The other suspects they will stay, citing supply movements as evidence. Historians still debate how predictable winter quarters truly were from year to year, and listening to these two men now, you understand why. Even officers who receive regular updates from command often work with partial information. A lieutenant waves you over, asking if you can help lift a small chest inside his tent. You step forward and grasp one of the handles. The chest is heavier than expected, filled with papers, tools, and perhaps a few personal items. Together you move it closer to his cot. He thanks you and gestures toward a canvas chair nearby, inviting you to rest a moment. You sit, feeling the unfamiliar comfort of furniture beneath you. The chair creaks slightly under your weight but holds steady. The lieutenant pours a small measure of coffee from a pot kept warm near his desk. He hands you the tin cup with a friendly smile, apologizing that officer's coffee tastes no better than anyone else's. You sip and agree with him instantly. The brew is smoky, bitter, and somehow endearing. As you drink, you take in the space around you. The lantern sways gently from the ridgepole. Paper stacks lean in a precarious but deliberate order. A small mirror hangs from a nail, reflecting the warm light. A wool coat lies neatly folded on the cot. Compared to your tent, this one feels like a compact office. Not luxurious, but organized. Functional. Intentional. You finish the coffee and thank the lieutenant for the invitation. He nods, picks up his pen again, and returns to his notes. You step out of the tent into the late afternoon light, blinking as your eyes adjust. Walking back toward your own section of camp, you cannot help but feel the contrast between the officers' quarters and the enlisted fire pits. Your tent is smaller, your bedroll thinner, your table non-existent. Yet the simplicity of your space carries its own comfort. Your fire pit is always lively with jokes, your tent row always humming with stories, your routines communal and warm. The difference between the two worlds is subtle but steady. Officers live with a bit more structure, a bit more furniture, a bit more quiet. Enlisted men live with more noise, more camaraderie, more shared improvisation. Both spaces together create the world of the camp, balanced like two sides of the same canvas coin. You reach your fire pit and see familiar faces gathered in their usual spots. Someone waves you over. You smile, feeling grounded again in the soft disorder of your own corner of the grove. The contrast lingers gently in your thoughts, like the glow of lantern light seen from a distance. You observe how officers and enlisted men juggle different duties and stresses, noticing the subtle social dynamics of camp life. The late afternoon sun settles into a warm amber hue that washes across the grove, softening the angles of tents and turning the lingering smoke from the fire pits into drifting ribbons of gold. You make your way back toward your own corner of the camp, still carrying the gentle contrast between officers' quarters and the enlisted fire pits in your thoughts. The rhythm of camp life continues around you, and you begin to notice the small patterns that shape this world. Routines that guide each man, spoken or unspoken expectations, and the quiet social lines that rarely blur but never feel harsh. You stop at the edge of the grove, where a group of enlisted men gather around a fire to prepare a simple meal. The pot hanging above the flames bubbles with a mixture of beans and chopped salt pork, its aroma heavy and steady. One man stirs with long, practiced motions, tapping the wooden spoon against the rim twice each time. Another crouches to adjust a piece of kindling, coaxing a brighter flame. Conversation drifts between them in easy waves. Someone jokes that if the officers tasted this batch, they would beg to trade their ration portions. Someone else teases that officers likely have a pot simmering with rare spices and fresh vegetables. A third man laughs and says that officers are busy with maps and reports, too frazzled to think about spices. These comments come with smiles, not bitterness. The divide between ranks exists, of course, but the men approach it with lightness, acknowledging it without letting it cloud the warmth of the camp. A sergeant approaches, his face tired but composed. He pauses to ask whether everyone has enough water to cook with. He checks the logs of firewood stacked nearby. His tone blends authority with compassion, a balance that comes naturally to sergeants who live among the men, sharing their beds of straw and their long marches. You watch how the soldiers straighten subtly when he speaks, not out of fear, but out of respect. Leadership at this level has less to do with commands and more to do with shared experiences. A few yards away, in a quieter part of the grove, you see two officers engaged in low conversation. They stand apart from the bustle, leaning slightly toward each other as they discuss tomorrow's schedule. One holds a slim notebook and occasionally taps the page with his pencil. The other gestures toward the layout of the camp, explaining changes they might implement if the regiment stays more than a few days. Their exchange is serious but not stern. Planning weighs on them in its own way, a burden that differs from the physical fatigue of enlisted men. You move toward the fire pit again and sit on a log, letting its warmth seep into your boots. The man stirring the beans asks if you want to taste a sample. You accept eagerly, taking a sip from the spoon. The flavor is rich, smoky, and slightly salty. You thank him, and he beams with a proud grin, noting that he added a pinch of something he claims is a secret. Whether it truly is a secret, or simply the leftovers of last night's seasoning, you cannot tell. But the moment feels like the miniature triumph it is. Nearby, two privates debate the schedule for tomorrow. One insists there will be an inspection just after dawn. The other argues that officers will delay inspection because they will need more time to finish paperwork. A third soldier overhears and says he heard the lieutenant mention a late start. The group laughs when they realize that no one truly knows the plan. Historians still argue about how predictable daily schedules were in these camps, though current evidence suggests that unpredictability was as common as routine. As the conversation fades, you notice how the men settle into their distinct roles. Enlisted men focus on the physical tasks of camp life, fetching water, tending fires, carrying logs, preparing food, mending torn jackets. Officers focus on coordination, organizing supplies, planning drills, managing rosters, sending reports. One group moves with busy hands, the other moves with busy minds. Both contribute to the whole, weaving together the rhythms that keep a regiment functioning. You spot a lieutenant strolling through the grove, checking in on various fire pits with an air of gentle attentiveness. He asks a few men if they need more cooking supplies, then kneels beside the fire to warm his hands. He hums a quiet melody while watching the beans bubble, a simple tune you recognize from earlier in the day. For a moment, the lines between officers and enlisted blur, softened by shared warmth and shared labor. Then he rises, nods politely, and returns to his duties. The moment feels natural, like waves brushing briefly against each other before drifting apart again. You decide to take a slow walk through the grove once more. As you move, you note the differences in voices. Enlisted men talk of home, families, food, and the familiar aches of camp life. Officers talk of routes, provisions, and the complexities of leading men through unpredictable weather and terrain. Both sets of voices carry truths of their own. Neither feels more important. Both are threads in the same fabric. You pass the quartermaster's tent, where supply organization takes on a unique sort of chaos. Boxes lie stacked in varied formations. Some crates bear markings you recognize: hardtack, beans, coffee, candles. Others feature more cryptic labels, their contents known only to the quartermaster. He stands with a ledger in hand, grumbling about discrepancies between paperwork and actual stock. He instructs a couple of men to help rearrange crates, his frustration fading as they share a joke about mules stealing items during transport. He smirks and admits the mules might indeed have their own stash somewhere. You continue walking until you reach a small clearing between the officers' tents and the enlisted area. It is quiet here, a neutral space where few linger. A couple of soldiers pass with an armful of logs, offering polite nods as they continue toward the fire pits. A captain crosses the path in the opposite direction, carrying a stack of documents. When their paths intersect, the men step aside with practiced ease. The captain nods, the soldiers nod back. No tension, no discomfort, just mutual acknowledgement. You sit on a stump at the edge of this dividing space. From here, you can see both worlds. On one side, officers bent over maps, discussing matters of strategy and survival. On the other, enlisted men laughing at a story involving a stubborn mule and a crate of spilled flour. The contrast feels gentle, not sharp, like two adjoining rooms lit by different lamps. You reflect on the forgotten letter you found earlier, imagining how its writer might have experienced these same social divides. Perhaps he stood in this very spot, listening to officers plan tomorrow's march while hearing enlisted men joke about dinner. Perhaps he felt the same quiet awareness that both groups depended on each other in ways too complex to summarize neatly. A soft breeze rustles the pine branches above you. The fire pits glow brighter as the sun dips lower. Men begin preparing for evening routines. Some wash their hands in tin basins. Others clean their muskets or sort through gear. Officers slip back into their tents to finish notes or read by lantern light. The rhythms rise and fall like slow breathing. You return to your fire pit, feeling the familiar welcome of voices and warmth. A friend motions for you to sit. Someone asks if you can help repair a strap. Another offers you a piece of dried apple. The evening unfolds naturally, weaving you once again into the shared space of enlisted life. The divide is still there, but it feels soft, steady, and almost comforting. Each part of the camp plays its role, creating a balance that keeps the regiment moving, marching, and living through the quiet challenges of camp life. As night settles deeper, the grove becomes a lantern-lit community, sustained by cooperation, subtle differences, and shared dreams of home. You settle by dim lamplight, reflect on the quiet hierarchy around you, and follow the sounds of night into a slow, calming wind down. The last light of the day sinks behind the treetops, leaving the grove wrapped in a deepening hush that settles over everything like a quilt. The fire near your company's area burns low now, reduced to a soft bed of glowing coals that pulse in slow, gentle breaths. You lower yourself onto a log, pulling your blanket closer around your shoulders. The wool is warm against your neck, smelling faintly of smoke and pine sap. Around you, the soft rhythms of night begin to take shape. A few men finish their evening chores in measured silence. Someone scrubs the bottom of a tin pot with sand, the metal scraping lightly in a steady rhythm. Another man rigs a rope between two stakes to hang his socks. The rope creaks as he ties the knot. A private packs away his pocket diary with careful movements, sliding it into its familiar corner of his haversack. Each sound is small, contained, and softened by distance. You look toward the officers' tents, their lanterns glowing like small moons through the thinning darkness. Inside them, shadows move gently. Officers lean over maps, fold blankets, finish notes, or simply sit on their folding stools with hands clasped, staring into the quiet. Their voices drift as low murmurs, hushed now that the business of the day is done. You wonder how heavy their thoughts feel as night settles. Some carry worry, some carry hope, some carry nothing more than the simple desire to rest. Back at the enlisted fire pit, men ease into their familiar evening conversations. A sergeant tells a story about a camp he once stayed in, where someone carved a checkerboard into a fallen log and nearly everyone in the regiment grew obsessed with it. Another man recalls hearing that a nearby unit received a crate filled entirely with mismatched shoes, an anecdote that sparks a debate about whether such mix-ups occurred regularly or only in rare bouts of supply chaos. Historians still argue the point, but the laughter that follows dissolves any need for resolution. You shift closer to the fire, letting its warmth soak deeper into your hands. A few men practice tying knots or adjusting straps. Someone hums the same slow tune you heard this morning, the melody wandering comfortably through the evening air. A soft breeze carries the smell of cooling earth, wet leaves, and faint traces of boiled coffee. The camp seems to exhale, its energy unwinding from the long march and the day-long settling of winter quarters. The grove darkens further, the shadows gathering gently around the tents. Lanterns become tiny islands of gold, their light flickering as if breathing with the men who rest beside them. You feel your own eyelids growing heavy, smoothed by the rhythm of crackling embers and distant murmurs. You lean back slightly, bracing your hands on the cool ground. Someone begins recounting an old fireside tale about a soldier who could identify any regiment by the sound of its marching cadence alone. Whether the story is true or a product of camp imagination hardly matters. The telling is slow and meandering, the kind meant to lull rather than excite. A private sitting across from you chuckles in a drowsy way, then rubs his eyes and pulls his blanket tighter. The fire shifts, sending up a brief swirl of sparks that drift upward before fading into the night. You watch them rise, tiny embers against the deepening sky. The stars peek through the branches above, scattered across the velvet backdrop. You tilt your head and breathe deeply, letting the cool air fill your lungs. The quiet feels vast, comforting, endless. You think again about the forgotten letter tucked in your haversack, the unfinished words, the gentle script, the memories folded between each line. It becomes part of your evening now, mingling with the soft stories and relaxed murmurs around the fire. You wonder if the writer once sat in a grove much like this, watching lanterns flicker and fires shrink, thinking about home and the people waiting far away. The company dog wanders past, pausing by your knee. You scratch behind its ears, and it sighs happily before curling up by the warmest part of the coals. Its breathing deepens within moments, a steady rhythm that blends seamlessly into the nighttime orchestra of soft sounds. A sergeant announces that taps will sound soon, though his tone is unhurried, as if to say the announcement is more ceremony than command. Men nod, finishing their last sips of coffee or tightening their blankets around their shoulders. The grove prepares for rest in the way it always does, gently, gradually, like a tide receding. You rise slowly, feeling the pleasant weight of fatigue in your limbs. The path to your tent glows faintly in the lantern light from nearby shelters. You walk it with unhurried steps, hearing the crunch of pine needles beneath your boots. The air cools against your cheeks. You reach your tent and lift the flap, stepping inside where your blanket and ground cloth wait patiently. You kneel and unlace your boots, setting them near the foot of your blanket. Your gear stands neatly beside the tent pole, and your haversack hangs from the wooden peg you carved days ago. You check that your tin cup is secure, that your canteen lies where you can reach it easily, that your small possessions remain in their proper places. Then you settle onto your blanket, pulling its warm weight over you. The ground beneath is uneven but familiar, molded slightly by your shape from nights past. You hear faint voices outside, thinning with each passing moment. The crackle of the fire becomes softer, more distant, like a memory. The lantern light leaking through the canvas walls dims as men extinguish their flames one by one. You close your eyes. The sounds of camp, boots shifting in tents, whispers fading, fire settling, tuck themselves around you. The grove breathes in the quiet rhythm of shared rest. You let your own breathing join it. The night deepens, the stars settle, and slowly, your mind drifts towards sleep. The lamplight fades to a soft glow, like a candle set far across a room. The canvas around you grows still, holding the warmth of your breath. Outside, the last murmurs of camp settle into calm silence. A faint creak of a wagon wheel, a distant thump as someone adjusts their gear. Then the gentle hush again, smooth and steady, like a tide returning to shore. You lie there, feeling the weight of the blanket on your chest, warm and grounding. The cool night air brushes lightly against your cheeks. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl calls once, its voice drifting like a thread through the darkness. Then quiet returns. Think of the tiny details of the day. The tin cup warming in your hands, the glow of embers in the fire pit, the rustle of pine needles beneath your boots. Let each memory soften, blur, and float through your thoughts like leaves drifting downstream. Your tent is still around you, safe, familiar, the kind of place where sleep settles easily. You notice the rise and fall of your breath, slow and peaceful. In, out, the rhythm steady and comforting. A faint breeze nudges the canvas flap, creating the softest whisper of sound. It feels like the grove exhaling, like the world loosening its shoulders, like night itself welcoming you deeper into rest. You allow your thoughts to quiet. No tasks now, no miles to march, no duties waiting at dawn. Only this moment, this softness, this breath. Rest comes gently in camps like this, carried on cool air and distant quiet. Let it find you. Let it settle over you like warm lamplight fading into darkness. You are safe. You are warm. You are here. And sleep is already moving toward you, calm and steady.